This is the second video for Module 5, and that is because I think it's kind of complicated to understand all the parameters of what you're learning about, and this is sort of the doing module, and so I want to kind of really clarify what approach I would like you to take to planning for instruction. So I have my notes open, and I'm going to let you read these pretty much on your own, but it kind of harkens back to the theories, again, trying to bring back this idea, what we learned about the knowledge theory, what we learned about the bilingual theory, which is applicable to children who are just learning English, so it's just using those bilingual concepts, and then Bruner's theory about representation of vocabulary or concepts, and how do we get that? Through direct experience, iconic experience, or enactive is direct. Enactive, iconic, or symbolic experience. And so read that, take a breath, and then what I really want to point you to is, this is kind of the planning model that I'd like us to use. It has 3 sort of big steps. One is the planning part, the second is teaching, and the third is sort of evaluating. In the planning part, just as an overview, and we'll go into more detail in a minute, planning using this idea of big concepts or big ideas, big understandings, starting there, prioritizing vocabulary, really working to find out what students know or what they don't know. And sometimes they know what a word association is, but they may not have a deep understanding of a particular concept or a word. So the point here is for you to know what they know what they don't know, and don't teach them what they already know. So if they already know something, that's not really worth our time. It may be part of what you cover in the lesson, but in fact of developing that deep understanding, you really want to work with things that they need to learn. The teaching part really kind of models the bilingual theory, starting with stage 1 with building an association. So that could be with an object, it could be with an experience, it could be also through symbols. So finger spelling, speech, sign, and pictures. So all of those are associations that you want the child to make between the concept and the symbol. And then stage 2 is really deepening their understanding of a concept or multiple concepts, typically, using really kind of focusing on the development of meaning, syntactic and semantic knowledge. And then the third, and this is the third stage in the model, is looking carefully at the structure of the word. And that would include the orthographic, the morphological, the phonemic structure, and things like if there are prefixes, suffixes, root words. And that is really the deepening part. And then the last part is really evaluating, did they learn, and at what level do they know the word? Do they know it just as an association still, or do they have an understanding of it as a deeper concept? So that's sort of the overview of the model. I do put together a worksheet that helps you, that helps you move through the process, so that it really helps you kind of look carefully and deeply at how you would teach vocabulary. And we're going to kind of follow a base book model. So we're doing it in literature using a book. It could be their reading book. Again, it could be for science and social studies, but for this activity, we're going to look at something they're reading. For my model, I'm using Little Nino's Pizza. And on D2L, you have a a link so that you can read the book, so you can see what I'm talking about. But step one really is this idea of big concepts. There are really two ways to kind of approach helping students learn something. One is through inductive and the other through deductive. Inductive really starts with all the pieces and you build up to the big idea, right? Deductive is where you have the big idea and you delve down and look at all the pieces. And so when we start with concepts or conceptual statements, we're moving deductively, we're working with a big concept. These are the things they need to understand, because this is where the vocabulary is going to fit into and underneath. So if you have big ideas that you really are focusing on, the vocabulary becomes useful in helping you get to that big idea. My examples for Little Nino's Pizza, and these are just basic understanding. It helps guide me and it helps the student. Sometimes families work together in a family business. Students may or may not know that before they read the book. Often restaurants specialize in a particular kind of food, and in this case they're specializing in making pizza or Italian food. Restaurants make money by selling food to customers, so understanding that there are customers in this story and then there are people who own the restaurant and do the cooking and the serving, and that there's a relationship there. And little guys need to be looking out for the big guys, and so there is a story, a part that really does talk about those with money and those with a lot of money and those who are who don't, the little guys, the owners of the small restaurant. But those are concepts, those are big ideas. And to me, that's a really important place to start, because a vocabulary word has to be connected with a concept. So you'll be asked to do that. Step two is to prioritize concepts. Now, needless to say, in a teaching, if you're teaching a story or reading science, social studies, it doesn't matter. You probably have a long list of words that you think that students may have trouble with, and you really are going to first make a good guess at what they know and don't know. But you cannot teach all of those, and so the idea of beginning to look at what's most important, because some of those other concepts can fit underneath or can be connected to it. So how you choose which vocabulary to teach is important. Sometimes you don't have a choice. The classroom teacher gives you the list of vocabulary. But what's the most important? I think that for my story, I did, in fact, pair concepts, because it's not a single word. It really kind of goes with a concept, and it helps me teach the word to have it paired. So knead, dough, stir, sauce, grate, cheese. Looking at helper, help, and helpful. Those are all in this story. Hungry, with people. I can pair it with different things when I'm teaching it, but in this story, those are what are paired. Fancy, expensive, chef. So I just picked about 10 words. The next stage is really to figure out ways to teach that initial association. So, and that can be with pictures and words and signs, and you are just trying to get that first basic understanding of what's the word, what's the sign or the symbol that you might be using. And again, it may be a picture, you may be using an icon. It could be the real thing. It could be an artifact. But you want to make sure that the student understands it, so you might do some things about understanding, and then you want them to be able to express it. And you must get the imitation, and the imitation must be right, whether it's in speech or whether it's in sign, because you're imprinting this in a child's brain. If they're not saying it correctly, if they're not signing it correctly, then the imprint will not be good. It won't be correct. The other thing is you can link all these different symbols. So you might have a picture, you might do finger spelling, you might have a sign, and those are all linked. But that is teaching those initial associations. And I give you some ways kind of to do that. One interesting way for some, some concepts are really hard, and a picture doesn't necessarily get exactly what the concept is. And so you've probably seen this idea of taking a concept and talking about what does it look like, what does it feel like, what does it sound like, what does it smell like, and what does it taste like, giving a more full association. That you're really beginning to kind of deepen the meaning when you do that. The next stage is really deepening it and deepening the meaning, what the meaning is. And this is where we compare using synonyms and a variety of other techniques and contrast. I give you some ideas here about how to begin to take apart the meaning of a word and kind of helping a child expand the way they may think about that word concept. So using semantic continua, maybe you have seen this before, but from one end to the other, the concept of helpful, not helpful, and helpful. And what might you put on that continuum? What are things that are really not helpful? Then what are some things that are really helpful? And then what are some things that are kind of in the middle? That breaks the concept down. I did take some things out of this story that could be placed along the continuum. Cheap and expensive, fancy and plain. And I was thinking particularly about restaurants. McDonald's would be plain. And then what might be fancy? I don't know what the students might know about this, but the restaurant on the lake, on the big lake, might be fancy. And then this categorizing. Taking words and actually putting them in categories and then mixing them up and putting them in new categories. So it may be by color, it could be by size, it could be by function. This way you're really beginning to kind of, again, deepen and help them manipulate the concept in their own heads. There's also something called a semantic feature analysis. I took the 3 words, the 3 verbs, and took kinds of food, and then they decide which matches. Again, expanding what students understand about the meaning of the word. Deepening. Here's another way, looking at the hierarchical structure with the big concept, then the secondary, the third, and fourth. How do they organize those concepts? The next stage is deepening it through understanding the semantic and the syntactic aspects of it. So is it a noun? Is it a verb? Is it an adjective? Is it an adverb? Is it a linking or a function word? For the most part, you're teaching content words, not necessarily function words when you're teaching vocabulary. So looking at different ways that you can pair verbs and nouns. Make money, make pizza. These are called propositions. You'll be reading about that. And then the third stage is really to help them fully analyze the word structure. So being able to look at derivations. Help, helper, helpful, wait, waiter, waitress. Oh, these are all in the story, or at some point are used in the story. And so analyzing them by number of letters, number of sounds, number of syllables, vowels, consonants. There are all sorts of ways to look at a word, but this really helps them imprint again the word meaning. This is the activity that you will go through. You'll do this with your partner. And I have a worksheet that looks very much like this, and you are to fill this out with your ideas about teaching vocabulary that you select from a reading called the Harlem Renaissance. And so you'll find that on D2L. So I hope this helps you. Gives you lots of ideas, and I hope you work through a lot of ideas.